It's right there. It's right there. It's right there. Oh.
David, that is the weirdest thing.
Do you hear the sound? Tina, it's not a plane. It's moving so fast, Tina.
If you're lucky enough to see an unexplained light in the sky, it's always thrilling. But in the majority of cases, there's a very simple and very human explanation. Yet when people claim to have been abducted by alien beings, it becomes difficult and challenging to comprehend. These close encounters of the fourth kind, or alien abductions, are a worldwide phenomenon. With countless reports from people who are genuinely convinced they've been snatched by extraterrestrials.
What you get in these files are lots of letters from people who believe they've been contacted by aliens, people who are getting telepathic messages from aliens.
Recurring themes among people who claim to have been abducted are flashes of light, followed by missing time and acute memory loss. In the case of Betty and Barney Hill in late September 1961, it was a terrifying road trip home in New Hampshire. The married American couple said they were chased by a bright light for miles. They stopped the car and discovered a UFO hovering 100 feet above them. Through his binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen beings with large heads and big eyes inside the craft. Scared witless, they got back in their car and sped away as quickly as they could. At some point, Betty and Barney claimed to have lost consciousness, waking up 2 hours later and 35 miles down the road in a state of shock. Their chilling encounter is legendary as the world's first reported alien abduction, and endless claims have followed since, from all over the world and in America in particular.
There were a number of fascinating individual cases, some alleged abductions.
What we call the Alien Abduction Club, it's a club that no one wants to join, but it's growing exponentially.
One of the most convincing incidents of alien abduction ever recorded occurred right here in the UK. And it happened to, above all people, a police officer. "40 years ago, in a quiet West Yorkshire village, one of the most convincing and disturbing alien encounters ever recorded took place. It was 5 a.m. on the 28th of November, 1980, in Todmorden, a quiet market town tucked away in the Pennines. Respected local bobby, Alan Godfrey, was on shift. Alan was in his patrol car en route to investigate reports of cows wandering the road when he was stopped dead in his tracks. Engulfing his car was a brilliant white light. As Alan's eyes adjusted, he could make out a strange diamond-shaped craft hovering close to the ground. The lower half was spinning. The last memory Alan had is reaching for his radio. When his awareness returned, he found himself driving 30 meters from the scene. Alan had lost a full 25 minutes with no memory of what had occurred. This bizarre encounter remains one of the most convincing in British UFO history. 40 years on, we'll leave no stone unturned to get to the truth about what happened on that fateful November night in 1980. Wow, Sarah, the mysterious case of Alan Godfrey in Todmorden. This sounds fascinating. It sounds scary. Is it true?
It sounds like science fiction to me. I don't want to judge it just yet. I would love to believe this story. I would love to believe that aliens exist and they came to West Yorkshire 40 years ago. But for me, I'm not sure just yet.
But I mean, some of the things, he lost 25 minutes of his memory. True. Okay, so how are we going to go about collecting the evidence to prove that this happened?
Well, that's a good question. The first thing we can do is actually listen to the account from Alan explaining what happened to him.
Okay, let's do that. 13 years after Alan Godfrey's life-changing experience, he agreed to be filmed for a documentary which reconstructed his ordeal in minute detail. And we've got access to the archive footage.
So I was driving up the road when I could see in front of me up here this object. It looked to be completely blocking the road. It was diamond-shaped. The bottom half of the object was spinning. It was hovering about 5 foot off the ground, and I could see underneath it. It was about 20 feet wide, 14 feet high.
Alpha Bravo 3 to Alpha Bravo Control. Message over.
I just couldn't contact anybody. So I picked my clipboard up and I started drawing a sketch of it. And then suddenly, I was at the other side of the object and it had gone. It had, like another 50, 100 yards of further road driving. I realised that there was half an hour missing from me drawing the object to me turning up at the other side of where the object had been. I wanted to know what had happened in that half hour. I did see a UFO that night, and nobody on this earth will ever tell me any different.
Wow. He seems really convinced.
Yeah, he certainly believes his account. It's an interesting story. And he's a police officer, so he's an upstanding citizen. He's a credible witness. He mentioned, he couldn't actually radio for help, and then suddenly it was 25 minutes later.
Why wasn't his radio working?
That could be anything. It could be a slight fault, it could be an electrical storm. There are so many things we could speculate on here.
Well, he mentioned that he did a sketch, didn't he? To have the coolness to be able to take out a notebook and sketch what you're seeing.
I know, it's quite impressive that he managed to do this and to focus during this quite frightening incident. Here's a sketch here.
It looks like a deflated beach ball.
It does, doesn't it? So it's 20 feet long, 14 feet high. He mentioned this was 5 feet off the ground. It's another piece of evidence because we've gone from just having his account, but now we've got at least a piece of artwork, a sketch of what it looked like.
Okay, so how do we move this investigation forward?
Well, I've got a person for you that we can speak to. His name is Nick Hunter. He's a podcaster, but he's also an expert in UFOs, and he actually spoke to Alan.
Alan Godfrey, we're investigating this case, trying to find some evidence, trying to prove that this actually happened to him. You met Alan, didn't you?
That's right, yes. His account is very believable, Craig. Alan's a very honest, salt of the earth. He basically said what he saw.
He returned to the scene later with a colleague, is that correct?
That's right. When they returned to the scene, they could see there was leaves on the ground that had been swirled around. There were broken branches. So there was definitely something there.
Did the police investigate it any further? Did they take any sort of soil samples or, sort of any forensic examination?
Well, it was the 1980s, things were a little bit different then. Unfortunately, Alan was basically cut off when it came to reporting this. He had a lot of hostility within the police force. All he was doing was reporting exactly what he saw.
What does Alan believe that he saw?
Alan believes he saw something strange. What it was, he doesn't know, but all he knows is that December morning, he saw something which didn't belong there. An interesting point is, Alan's account happened pretty much 1 month before the famous Rendlesham incident.
The events of the legendary Rendlesham incident in December 1980 saw stunned United States military personnel confronting what could have been an alien craft near a US Air Force base next to Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk. Their encounter was captured on tape.
Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
The description of the craft that allegedly landed in Rendlesham Forest was similar in shape and size to the UFO that appeared in Todmorden, and it too was emitting a bright light. Could there be a connection between Rendlesham and Alan Godfrey? Was the craft seen in Suffolk the same as the one in Yorkshire? And the town of Todmorden in Yorkshire also has particular significance because it was the scene of another suspected alien abduction, a matter of months before the Alan Godfrey incident. In June 1980, the tragic death of coal miner Zygmunt Adamski caught the attention of UFO investigators when his body was discovered on a coal heap in Todmorden after being reported missing 5 days earlier. Although kidnapping or a lightning strike were initially considered, bizarre burns on his neck, covered in a peculiar gel-like substance, could not be explained. The case was described by the coroner as the biggest mystery of his career. A policeman had been dispatched to the scene of the rumoured alien abduction, who was none other than Alan Godfrey.
Do you believe him?
100%. He'd have no reason to lie. It's not something people really want to come forward to say, you know, they saw a UFO or they've met aliens. It can destroy people's careers.
What I think is fascinating there is it kind of ruined his police career, this sighting.
Yeah, that is really interesting, the fact that he was willing to say what he saw, no matter what the consequences. But Craig, they didn't take photographs. They had cameras 40 years ago.
And broken branches and squirrely leaves, that's not enough.
It could be so many reasons. And that's the problem, because we're trying to do a thorough scientific investigation.
Something must have happened. How do we get to the bottom of it? On a cold autumn night in 1980, police officer Alan Godfrey's life changed forever after coming face to face with a UFO. A close encounter of the terrifying kind.
That object was real. If I'd have got out of the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone bang.
As we try to discover if Alan was genuinely confronted by an alien craft, or whether there's an earthly, scientific explanation for what happened to him, perhaps a physical or psychological episode. Renowned UFO researcher Jenny Randalls, who was the first to investigate the encounter, will, we hope, shed more light on the remarkable story. We're investigating this case of Alan Godfrey, and here you're a friend of his, a lifelong friend. What was his state of mind before all this happened? Was he under a lot of stress? It's a very stressful job being a policeman.
It is a stressful job, but he'd been a police officer for several years. He'd been in many stressful situations which he'd handled with distinction and been given commendations for, and he followed all the general procedures. He picked up the sketch pad as if he was recording the details of a car crash. He used his radio communication systems to try to contact other officers. Then there was this flash of light and he lost consciousness. When he recovered consciousness further down the road, he was sufficiently alert to drive his car back. That's not a man who was completely freaked out by this. That was a police officer doing his job, even though he'd just experienced something literally out of this world. What I will say is that the police force ensured that he was thoroughly investigated by psychiatrists, by psychologists, by physical doctors afterwards. And they said to him, I don't know why they sent you here. There's clearly nothing wrong with you.
Can you tell us what you were able to rule out in your investigation?
Well, the first thing that Alan actually remembered him thinking as he saw this phenomenon in front of him was, it's a bus. But within a few seconds after that, he said, it's not a bus. It was very early in the morning. There were no service buses running at that time. But there was a bus that used to go down that road and collect drivers to take them back to the garage. We actually spoke to the driver of the bus that passed that spot, and that driver, on his way out, experienced something very similar to what Alan did.
So we've got someone corroborating what Alan has said then?
Oh yes. There are multiple witnesses, in fact. There was also a caretaker at the school who was opening it up for the weekend, and he observed this thing zigzagging across the valley and disappearing in the general direction of Burnley. There was also another witness about 2 miles down the road who also contacted the police station the following morning to report having seen something at the same time, zooming over his head.
We've got like multiple witnesses now.
Yeah.
We've got caretakers, bus drivers, all saying that some strange phenomenon happened at the same time that Alan reported it. Okay, let's try and investigate these missing 25 minutes.
Well, after we'd done every other step of the investigation process, we used a number of psychiatrists, doctors, psychologists, and he was regressed under hypnosis, and they were as astonished as we were when he came out with a story about being hit by a beam of light that came out of this object. The memories were very physically real. They actually made him ill. The missing time is real, there's no question about that.
How has this, or how did this, affect Alan's life afterwards?
It changed his life. It's never been the same since, because it remains there as an unsolved mystery.
Alan's not the only person in the UK to have made such startling claims. Another case from August 1992 has eerily similar parallels. Two men, Gary Wood and Colin Wright, were driving to Tarbrack, South Lanarkshire in Scotland when they were enveloped by what they described as a curtain of bright light. They blacked out for what felt like seconds. But when they came to, they found they had lost an hour. When hypnotically regressed, they described being taken on board an alien ship and examined by strange beings. Their account was taken so seriously, the Ministry of Defence sent officials to investigate. Alan Godfrey's case also caught the attention of the MOD.
It was submitted to the Ministry of Defence, who filed it and sent people out to investigate.
So you're saying the Ministry of Defence investigated this?
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. They went out to the police station and they actually interviewed him with his sergeant present. At that time, there was a Defence Ministry department where they investigated all reports whom they thought were worthy of follow-up, and they had intelligence staff associated with it.
You see, I'm excited now, I'm exhilarated. It wasn't just Alan who saw things that night. You've got caretakers, you've got bus drivers. Someone described it as zigzagging across the field. So we got multiple witnesses.
Yeah, I've really changed my mind on this story listening to Jenny's account.
What I'm interested in is the MOD got involved. The Ministry of Defence came down and interviewed Alan with his sergeant.
Yeah, it really looks like the evidence is building. We've now got multiple witnesses as well as accounts of other incidents. We've got MOD involved in the investigation.
Do you not think we should look at the regression a little bit deeper?
As a scientist, I have to be sceptical of something like hypnosis, but we need to look more in depth at this to see if there's anything else we can find out. We need to know what happened to Alan Godfrey.
We're investigating the case of West Yorkshire police officer Alan Godfrey, who claims to have encountered a UFO on the Burnley Road in the Pennines on the 28th of November 1980. But what's even more extraordinary is Alan's claims of missing time, as well as memory loss from the night, which some experts believe could be evidence of alien abduction. For decades, witnesses like Alan, who insist they've had extraterrestrial experiences, have faced ridicule and derision.
I did see a UFO that night, and nobody on this earth ever told me any different.
But whilst there was a time when UFOs and alien abductions seemed pure sci-fi fantasy, this year they've taken on a stark new reality. In June 2021, following an investigation into UFO sightings reported by the United States military, the US government revealed that only one of the 144 reported sightings could be definitively explained by science.
Look at that thing! My gosh!
You have the recognition by the US government that UAPs are real, whatever they are, is at a threat. We still have no clue of the intent.
The admission by authorities they have no idea who or what is behind these unexplained aerial phenomena feeds further fuel to the theory they may actually be extraterrestrial.
Oh man, that is phenomenal. Look how it pulses though. I know. That is freaky, man.
and it has prompted calls for re-investigation of some of the most convincing accounts of sightings in recent years, including that of Alan Godfrey. His vivid and terrifying experience is one of the most startling and compelling close encounters in UK UFO history. I feel much more invigorated about this story now. A touch of excitement, in fact. Alan Godfrey in Todmorden said he saw a big diamond-shaped spaceship, but he wasn't the only one who saw it. And the MOD got involved and interviewed him with his sergeant present, which proves that they took it seriously as well.
Well, they're bold claims, aren't they? And it's certainly exciting that we've got a mounting amount of evidence towards these claims. I call in the scientific community an encounter of the fourth kind, so something which involved actually interacting with a species not from Earth. It doesn't prove anything just yet.
Where do we go from here?
Well, interestingly, this isn't the only such claim. There's been other people making similar claims to Alan, and if we can understand why they happened, it could help us with this case. I actually caught up with Nick Pope, who's a former MOD investigator and a UFO expert, who told me about another case. So the idea of people alleging to be abducted by aliens, this is nothing new.
No, these reports go back decades, and I think it's one thing to say that you have seen a UFO because we know statistically that most UFO sightings are misidentifications. But if somebody tells you that they've been abducted by aliens, there's not much middle ground.
So actually seeing or claiming to see an alien life form, there have been some quite famous cases, haven't they? There was Pascagoula in 1973. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, this was a really bizarre case. This is the state of Mississippi. Two guys out fishing, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson. They see a UFO, but then they describe almost being in a state of waking unconsciousness.
Could you describe the vehicle? It's probably oblong. You know, you see something like that, scare you to death. And I couldn't believe it. With a regular noise to it. It's a little motor sound. Just like that. That's all. And, you know, you think you're dreaming about something like that, you know.
And they then describe these bizarre entities with like strange appendages and slits, and they talk about being taken on the ship and having these procedures.
I'm scared of that. I've seen this one that I've never seen nothing like that before in my life. And the position they had me, I couldn't move. You just try to talk to them, ask them what was going on? Yes, I did. But I get a buzz inside like one of them, that's all. The first thing I told him, I said, son, ain't nobody gonna believe this.
They did an examination. We was probably in there, I'm gonna say 45 minutes. They put us back out at the same place we were, facing the water, and I was froze. When it took off, it didn't make hardly any noise at all. You just heard like a zipping noise. It was zip, and that was it, and it was gone.
Took them down there and put them in a room with a voice-activated mic, and it's hidden in the desk to see what they'd say. Well, me and the other investigator got up and left to let them talk, to see if they was going to say, well, we got them fooled and all.
I keep sleeping that like it is, but I understand you're crazy. Again, when they brought you out of that, man. When they brought it, I remember my heart, they just froze out just like that. I couldn't do it. Just seen them look at me for a minute. You can't make people believe that, though. I don't know, so you're going to believe it out, because I know. They better wake up and start believing. I knew all along they was people from out of the world up there.
You would think that this is a fisherman's tale almost, a tall story. But just because something sounds bizarre, who's to say that it isn't true? I think it is interesting that recently some new witnesses have emerged. Turns out other people in the local community saw things too.
Can you explain what these new witnesses saw?
Well, one of the most interesting witnesses of all was a police sergeant who actually took the call from one of the witnesses that night. But what's really significant is that he said that in the course of that night, he received around 50 calls from other people in the local community reporting a UFO.
So we've gone from a case where it's two men, we don't know how credible their story is, to now having a police officer involved as an additional witness within this case, which could potentially add some credibility.
Yes, I think the police witness is absolutely something that adds credibility. And there's a couple of other witnesses I'm aware of too. There's somebody who was operating a crane who said that he saw a UFO. And then there's another witness who claims that she saw a strange looking humanoid figure actually in the water.
So what are we saying then? That this has been happening for decades and people have just not been believed?
Yeah, that seems to be apparent. What we're finding is that what happened to Alan Godfrey isn't an isolated case. There are now multiple accounts of people who claim to have experienced similar things, but because they were just dismissed, they weren't investigated.
Well, people in Pascagoula are only just coming forward now from all those years ago saying that I witnessed it too. So maybe we could get more witnesses coming forward to say that they saw what Alan Godfrey saw as well.
They absolutely could. There's so many possibilities. We know that people who were scared to come forward are now talking again. This case here with Alan Godfrey is 40 years old, over 40 years old, yet it's still unsolved, but it doesn't mean we can't solve it.
We're immersed in an inquiry of the most compelling but complex kind. Alien abductions. And in particular, the case of Alan Godfrey, who in one of Britain's most celebrated cases claims to have had a close encounter with an unknown flying object on a dark Yorkshire road in November 1980. But there's more to this story, because somewhere in the middle of that encounter, Alan lost 25 minutes.
I wanted to know what had happened in that half hour.
It was only when he tried to fill in the blanks that this bizarre story became even stranger. We'll stop at nothing to find more evidence and get to the truth of what really happened to Alan Godfrey that night. Okay, Sarah, we've got Alan Godfrey, an on-duty police officer in West Yorkshire. He sees a diamond-shaped spaceship in front of him.
What it was, he doesn't know, but all he knows is that he saw something which didn't belong there.
Now, we've got multiple witnesses, the caretaker, the bus driver, people have saw it zigzagging across a field.
There was also another witness who also contacted the police station the following morning to report having seen something at the same time, zooming over his head.
But we have no hard physical evidence.
It's been 40 years since this case happened, and could it have just been a folk story, something which has been embellished over time?
What I'm really interested in is that missing 25 minutes.
I've got someone who might be able to help with this. This is really our last chance to find out exactly what happened to Alan Godfrey, and the person we're going to speak to is one of the UK's most renowned UFO experts. His name is Philip Mantle, and he joins us now.
Hi, Philip.
Good afternoon, Craig.
Philip Mantle is a world-renowned UFO expert, author and researcher. Having dedicated 40 years of study to the case of Alan Godfrey, he has forensic knowledge of Alan's hypnotic regression.
Can you talk us through what exactly happened in the regression with Alan Godfrey?
So he describes driving up the road, but something grabs his attention and he goes to take a closer look at it. And at first, under hypnosis, Alan thinks it's a bus. But as he gets closer, you can hear the quizzical tone in his voice.
It's a bus.
Yes.
It's not a bus. It's not a bus.
So the hypnotherapist asked him, well, what is it?
It looks like a flying saucer. It's spinning. There's a light on top. It's a dome. I'm not going any nearer.
So he gets back in his patrol car, starts to draw this. Then he remembers being further down the road. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Alan throws his hands in a cross shape across his face and he recoils backwards. And he literally shouts, there's a light, there's a light, there's a light. There's this blinding light in his eyes. And slowly but surely, he regains his composure and he starts to describe the scene inside.
I'm in a room now. There's a table. There's him.
Alan hears this man speak, but his mouth doesn't move. Alan can hear what he's saying inside his head.
I can understand him, but I can't. He's not moving his mouth.
So he asks Alan to get on this, we'll call it a bed. And it's while he's on this bed, he sort of looks to one side, and again he recoils and he goes, ugh, ugh. And he's talking about these smaller creatures. To him, looked like children, but he said they had heads that looked like the old-fashioned light bulbs.
Oh, them are horrible.
Who's they?
I don't want to talk about them. It's small, about the size of a little 5-year-old lad. They're touching me.
And in the end, he's brought out of the hypnosis, having recounted these details. And it's very strange. Alan has no idea how he got on board this thing. But there are similarities with other cases as well, where regression has taken place. It's got a nickname, it's called Doorway Amnesia. And what we call the Alien Abduction Club, it's a club that no one wants to join.
Philip, how many people are in the Alien Abduction Club?
You'd be surprised. It's growing exponentially, but most of the people that are in that club don't seek publicity, don't want to go on the record. Very famous incident involved Travis Walton.
US forestry worker Travis Walton was lumberjacking in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona in November 1975, when he had the most terrifying encounter of his life.
I just felt this numbing shock go through my body.
He went missing for 5 days before reappearing on the side of a road with apparently no memory of how he got there.
But I could still see this shiny hull there hovering above the highway before it went up.
His claim of alien abduction is one of the most infamous in the world. Just like Alan Godfrey, Travis Walton couldn't recall boarding the alien craft, but claims to have woken up to find himself in a sterile room, being examined by strange entities.
When I could finally focus my eyes, I could see it was these creatures. And I just flipped out. Just started screaming. They were hairless, small, huge eyes, and they just kept staring at me.
Travis Walton saw very human-looking like beings, but then some other different types of creatures. So there are similarities with other accounts.
Let's put the hypnotic regression aside and let's just purely focus on the sighting of the UFO. Why did he not sort of seek to find some physical evidence of this?
Alan thought best thing to do is report this to my superior officers, which he did. They asked him to make a full report, which he did, which incidentally was sent to the Ministry of Defence, but you can't find it anywhere in their files that have been released.
Do you not think there's a more likely down-to-earth explanation for this?
Alan doesn't say he was abducted by aliens. What he does say is the thing he saw on the road that morning, just coming off his night shift, he said if he had a brick, he could have thrown it at it and it would have gone clank.
I did see a UFO that night. That object was real. If I'd have got out of the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone bang.
He drew it on his notepad while he sat in the police car. Couldn't get through on the radio, which was not unusual for the area, I might add. The incident on the road that morning, he's 100% certain that this was something quite extraordinary.
What do you think it was?
Good question. I mean, I really couldn't put my finger on what it may or may not be. We have to remember, Alan had more to lose than they had to gain by admitting to such a story and going public with it. What I would say is that Alan's story, going back from 1980, has never really changed, which I think speaks volumes for him.
Look, I've just noticed something interesting. Philip mentioned in his interview with us that the radio doesn't often work where Alan Godfrey was, but Alan Godfrey in his interview claimed that something stopped the radio working, and that kind of leads me to think that some of this other evidence might not be as credible as we first thought.
But the hypnotic regression, that is, some of that stuff there is it's next level, isn't it?
What we've actually got from that is a transcript which came from the regression.
Oh, look. Them are horrible. Who's horrible? They are. Who's they? I don't want to talk about them. Why not? Because they're horrible. What do they look like? They're small. Yeah, how small is small? 3 foot, 4 foot? About the size of a little 5-year-old lad. And how many? About 8. Wow, 8 of them. What's happening now? They're just touching me. Wow.
Chilling stuff, isn't it?
Under hypnosis, that is frightening.
The Alan Godfrey case is one of the most disturbing and perplexing to hit our desk. It's time to review the evidence we've uncovered and see if we can reach a conclusion.
Well, let's look at what we've got. Unfortunately, most of the evidence is purely anecdotal. In fact, we've got no hard physical evidence. We've got a bus driver and a caretaker who said they thought they saw something odd. We've got Alan Godfrey's sketch of what he thought he saw that night. The MOD, they were involved.
That's interesting to me.
But those files went missing. When they released the files, they went in there, so...
Yeah, but they weren't missing, they just didn't release them to the public. There's probably thousands of MOD files that haven't been released.
Why hasn't it been released?
That we don't know, but we can't say that's conclusive evidence.
Okay.
It's a mystery still.
And we've got the transcript from Alan's hypnosis, in which his suppressed memories of the missing 25 minutes were revealed.
But that's all the evidence we've really got.
Do we have enough to determine what really happened to Alan Godfrey on that dark night in Yorkshire in November 1980?
Well, I thought we'd split these into two, the UFO sighting and the alien abduction, and decide on them individually.
I agree.
Okay, but before we reach a conclusion, I think Alan's been kind of lost in this a little bit, so let's look at his opening statement once again.
I realised that there was half an hour missing from me drawing the object to me turning up at the other side of where the object had been. I wanted to know what had happened in that half hour. I did see a UFO that night, and nobody on this earth will ever tell me any different. That object was real. If I'd have got out of the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone bang.
He believes what he saw.
I believe he believes, but there's not enough for me to go on.
But lots of other people saw it, so there is a question mark there.
But did they? Or is this something which has become embellished over the decades? We don't know.
It's time to put our cards on the table. Was Alan Godfrey's encounter extraterrestrial or not?
Okay, so when it comes to the case of the UFO sighting, I'm going to say case unproven.
I'm going to agree with you on that one.
Let's look at the missing 25 minutes. What do you think on that one?
I'm going to be bold and say that transcript is not enough evidence for me. We're trying to prove something so extraordinary that one transcript does not cut it. I'm going to say case closed, it did not happen.
Case closed?
Case closed.
You were so harsh.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say case unproven.
Perhaps the most mind-boggling case we've come across in the investigation hub. The possibility that Yorkshire copper Alan Godfrey was abducted by aliens simply can't be corroborated by the available evidence. But having learned that multiple witnesses all saw an object moving erratically in the skies that cold night in November 1980, something strange must have happened. If extraterrestrials are travelling thousands of light years across the universe to visit Earth, why wouldn't they land their craft and take a much closer look at the human race?